Why are tree valuations important? We need to understand why we're planting trees or why we're maintaining trees and what are the alternatives. So we have a benefit cost analysis. We need valuations, in my view, so that we can actually create budgets and forecasts. How much is this going to cost? What's it going to cost us today? What's it going to cost us 10, 20, 30 years' time? And what benefits it will bring in that time frame. And in particular, and this is where I think valuations need to change through time, not just be based upon historic cost, is how are those benefits and costs going to be changing through time? And then there's also the issue about monitoring financial performance. How does the return on that green investment, or however we want to talk about it, compare with other essential investments in infrastructure? Society's needs are changing, and in my view, the complexity and the rate of change of those needs is accelerating. And so we need to be aware of that when we're valuing something. We've got more competition and demand for public resources. So if we are going to make investments, we need to have a much better idea of how they compete with those competing requirements, because it's going to get harder and harder to actually get the resources we need to maintain the urban forest and to grow it. And therefore we also need to think about what can the urban forest be doing to actually reduce the costs. And we've got a rising focus on intergenerational tax, income transfers and spending concerns. All those things, in my view, make a proper valuation of the urban forest more important, because it's going to be competing with more and more things than it would have been talked about competing 10, 15, 20 years ago. And the changing priorities. Now, this a group called the Investor Group on Climate Change. They're really a group of financiers. They're talking about by 2030, climate change could cost $147 billion a year if we don't do anything, and by 2060, $656 billion a year. Urban forests obviously have a mitigation role, but in terms of priority, you look at health and social assistance spending in Australia, and this is now $234 billion. Research, particularly more recent research, is showing that the urban forest can play an important role in healthcare. The ones I've put there, like cardiovascular disease, if you're looking at in the order of $40 billion, it's being spent medically on healthcare costs, plus around about $26 billion, as I say there, for the stroke and societal costs. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, $20 billion, probably now double that. Dementia, that's going to be a big one. Autism. Now, the NDIS is funding $9 billion for autism care in 24-25. And then we've got anxiety and depression. You put those all... Now, the interesting issue is there's a lot of literature around now which is showing what are the benefits to each of these issues of being part of the urban forest. And it could be quite significant. A lot of the times it's talk about 2 or 3%, sometimes 15, 20%. So we've got this increasing recognition and quantification of the more nuanced benefits of the urban forest across a whole number of features. When you look at the values, the two biggest asset classes in Australia are superannuation and homes. And they are all based upon those valuations on the future, not historic cost. Do we need to think about how we value these assets in terms of their future services rather than the cost of creating them? And how do we do that? And if the accounting standards say, no, you can only have historic cost or some inflation adjustment, shouldn't the councils and others be thinking about more of a shadow pricing or a shadow valuation to say, we've put these trees in, we expect this will have this benefit in terms of quality adjusted years of life, reduction in autism, reduction in ADHD, reduction in cardiovascular disease. Should that be something that should be thought about if you can't actually don't want to put it in your formal valuation? And I think that's the type of stuff we should think about so that we can actually show the benefit of the expansion of the urban forest.